Welcome to listening to Paint Dry with Mike and Dan, a podcast about the art and hobby of miniature painting. I'm Mike.
And I'm Dan. Today we're going to start off with a few housekeeping items.
Yep, the first thing I have to do is I have to make a correction from my review. I misspoke and said that Tego/Level Up Hobby were once Kabuki Studios. I was under that impression, but I apologize. They sent me an email and said that they're not one and the same or never were, so my bad, I apologize. Tego/Level Up Hobbies. The second thing, Dan, is that we got another listener email.
All right, that's 2.
That is 2 in total. 2 people. We've got 2 listeners out there. Awesome.
Hey, we get to change everything to listeners now, not just listener.
That's true.
That makes things so much easier.
We're in the plural now. That's awesome. So our email from the dice holder says, "Hey, I just wanted to give you a shout. You asked for feedback on the show. I really enjoyed the podcast. I have found new people to follow and to get to learn more about people I already know. Keep up the great work." Well, I responded back saying thank you, etc., and asking for permission to read the email on the show. And his response was, "Please feel free to read my email on the show. I also should mention that I like the topic discussion also. I enjoyed the Jack the Ripper show a lot. Thanks again," from the dice holder. So Dice Holder, thank you so much for the email. We really appreciate it. Anybody else out there who's got any feedback, you can hit us up at listeningtopaintdry@gmail.com. We'll also have a link to that in the show notes as well. But again, thank you so much.
So with that in mind, we're going to try something a little different. We received a lot of that positive feedback for the Jack the Ripper episode, and it had us thinking about a format that we could follow for the next bunch of shows. So it turns out we really enjoyed doing the last format with the Jack the Ripper episode, and we decided to try different types of genres out there to explore with our listeners. Having background information and points of reference are fantastic tools for us to help on our journey to become better, braver, happier painters. So today, we're going to focus in the world of steampunk.
It's a fascinating topic. There is so much lore out there, even though it's a relatively new genre.
Mike, why don't you get us started with some background then?
So what is steampunk? According to steampunkavenue.com, steampunk is futuristic yet retro at the same time. Steampunk is truly one of a kind. The genre blends the aesthetic and technology of the 19th century with elements of science fiction. It's literary and an audiovisual work that takes place in an alternative reality where technological progress is based not on electricity, but on the steam engine, hence steampunk. Now, it's interesting that the origin of the term is relatively new. There have been many works now that are considered kind of the seminal for the fictional genre, and they were published in the 60s and 70s, but the actual term didn't come until the late 80s when an author whose name was K.W. Jeter, who was trying to find a general term to describe the works of authors like Tim Powers and James Blaylock, and used the word steampunk to kind of describe it, and it just kind of took off from there. And so what kind of happened is the main thing, as the lore started to develop, so did kind of the cosplay/fashion side of it. But the interesting aspect of steampunk, though, is that it has its roots in much earlier literature, such as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and also there are spatterings of steampunk-type inventions in H.G. Wells' books, etc. The first actual steampunk novel is considered to be Titus Alone by Mervyn Peake, which was written published in 1959. And so, in considering in the world of the backdrop of like horror fiction or mythology or sci-fi, etc., and fantasy, steampunk's a relatively new genre, Dan.
Okay, well, I don't read a whole lot, so I mean, I know 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea because I think there was a movie, and I think there used to be something at Disney World. So if I didn't read about steampunk, how would I figure this stuff out?
Well, that's a great segue into the movies, man. So some of these movies that I want to point out probably don't meet the aesthetic of what purists of steampunk have in mind, but these are kind of ones that are widely known by the general population, and they may not necessarily associate with kind of a steampunk feel. The first one is Wild Wild West, and that starred Will Smith and Kevin Kline and it was based on an old television show of the same name. And kind of, they took it to an extreme. I kind of I enjoyed the movie for what it was. I didn't look at it from a critical steampunk eye, but I definitely enjoyed it. Other movies like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Children of the Lost City, one of my personal favorites, and I love the book, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and I feel like the movie had a little more steampunky feel than the book did, which, if you haven't read any of those series, those are fantastic. Then there's the Van Helsing movie, the one starring Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale, because there's been a bazillion Van Halen. There's been a bazillion Van Halen.
Yeah, definitely Van Halen.
And then A Series of Unfortunate Events is also considered a steampunk movie as well. Now, there's plenty more. I didn't mention The Golden Compass. Of course, that's got the steampunky feel. And hey, you know what? If I missed one that's important, let me know, because it might be something I would dig watching. Tell us at listeningtopaintdry@gmail.com. That would be awesome. So any of those, have you seen any of those, Dan?
I have seen all of them.
Nice.
Multiple times.
I missed one. There's an animated one called 9. Just the number 9. And I looked at our notes and my notes, and I'm like, why is the number 9 there? And I realized 9 is a movie as well, and it's an animated movie. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Now, it's also, so we have kind of that background, but then we also have the background of novels and movies and things like that. But there's also kind of a steampunk aesthetic as far as clothing goes. And that's typically the Victorian fashion with kind of goggles. Lots and lots of goggles are in steampunk. That's kind of a mandatory item, I believe. If you're in steampunk, you need to have some goggles. There's the Victorian aspect of it, cosplay-wise, and there's kind of the almost like factory worker look that goes along with steampunk as well. So you kind of have two dichotomies of different feels for it. So why don't we talk about how all this stuff relates to the world of painting? Why don't we start with talking about miniatures and different miniatures that are out there and different companies that make them. I'll start off. Reaper has actually a pretty extensive steampunk line. I was surprised. There were upwards of 50 miniatures from Reaper that were in the steampunk feel. Also, something that I've noticed that's very common too is taking other fiction and turning it into steampunk. I noticed several different companies have taken things like the characters from The Wizard of Oz and put them in a steampunk aesthetic, which is kind of cool, you know. The Tin Man becomes a steam cyborg, etc., things like that. Dorothy's got instead of a left arm, she's got a
broom.
I was going to go a cannon, but steampunk, I don't know. Unless if it was a steam operated broom and she was wearing goggles, we're in the money.
Harry Potter had a steam powered broom, right?
No, that was
magic. Okay. Oh, that's magic. Okay, maybe it's a different show. Magic. Okay,
that is an entirely different show. Scale 75 also has a line of miniatures as well, both 75 millimeter and 35 millimeter and bus to choose from that have the steampunk aesthetic. They kind of, the names of their steampunk thing is kind of unified across their miniature line, and then they have a chibi game line, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Green Stuff World doesn't have any miniatures that are steampunk, but if you are into doing if you're basing or have a steampunk aesthetic that you want to do, you can get cosplay stuff from them, but you can also get great bits to do basing with. So they have watch parts and gears and things along those lines, and so that's a pretty cool thing to know about. You had mentioned to me earlier, Hassle-Free Miniatures have some that kind of go along those lines. You can also find, there's stores that host a bunch of them too. Like, you said Noble Knight Games had a slew of steampunk miniatures on it. But the truth is, you could pretty much take anything that's a Victorian model and kind of give it a steampunk aesthetic. And so even if you were to look at things like, there's a game called Tombstone by Black Sun Miniatures, and there's a game associated, but really you buy this for the miniatures. No offense, Black Sun, but the game is okay. The miniatures are fantastic. Those are all Western with also Victorian factions and things along those lines. So those would be great substitutes or miniatures you could do conversions with, etc. So what about, did you find any other miniature companies, Dan?
There's so many of them out there because I don't think there's any intellectual properties that say you can't do steampunk. So as you said, like Wizard of Oz and changing that aspect and blending them together by putting gears on them or leather outfits and things like that. You're able to expand what you're doing. And, in the miniature world, like you said, all you have to do is cut an arm off and put a robot arm on it, paint it brass or bronze, and you kind of have a steampunkish kind of feel to it. Put a top hat on it, some goggles, put some gears on the floor, and there you go. I think that's probably why it took off, because the aesthetics are kind of neat. They're a little different than the very static type of feel that we have with most of our miniature game systems. And it also lends very well to 3D printing. So even though I don't, off the top of my head, can think of many games systems or companies that produce the steampunk style, which there's uncountable number out there, it's equally is populated when you go into the 3D world and look for steampunk stuff. So you're going to have, the corsets, you're going to have the long Victorian dresses, you're going to have top hats, you're going to have goggles, you're going to have gears, you're going to have different kinds of weapons with steam apparatuses on them, everything to make whatever you're doing into the steampunk kind of aesthetic. And it's kind of neat. So I think it's a little bit different than some of the other genres out there that we look at in our miniature world, because there is no static. I mean, yeah, if you have an entire army, but the idea of each of your figures wouldn't be that they all have a right arm that's mechanical. You might have a right left. You might have, a gear for an eye or something. So and so looks like he's from World War One, but he's half his body is mechanical and he's got to wind it up. So each of your figures will look different because they'll have different pieces that are replaced and is using a steam apparatus. So that's what makes it kind of interesting and kind of fun to do. It's definitely for folks who like conversions.
Right, before we delve more into that, I'm going to throw out a few games that I found too that have some miniatures in them, just so there's another place that people can go. Malifaux has some steampunk themed stuff, and they have some bases that you could purchase that look exactly like kind of steampunk. Scale 75, like I said before, they have a chibi game called Smog Riders, which they have a set of characters in their steampunk universe, and they converted them all to chibi style models. And chibis are the ones kind of the cartoony, large head, tiny body, looks like what you want, like the picture that gets drawn of you when you go to a theme park or something like that, like Busch Gardens or something, when you go in. And then we both found Twisted by Demented Games, and I love their miniatures, man, for the steampunk. Their miniatures are so tight.
Yeah, those are very good.
So those are my games. I know you had some other ones that you found.
Well, there's, you're talking about Wild Wild West. Well, there is Wild West Exodus that has a steampunk aspect to it. Catalyst Games did a game called Leviathans, which is kind of like Battlefleet Gothic, which is large ships. So you can imagine they look kind of old and steam out in space and lots of blimps and balloons. And so that you have that game. And you already talked about Smog Riders, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't have to talk about that one. Space 1889. That's another game. There's also War Machine. You have giant robots that are steam powered, so obviously that's part of the aesthetic. Also.
Yeah, actually, War Machine, it lends itself, especially with some of those. What do they call them? Jacks.
Those are the giant robots that are steam powered.
Right, and so there's so much potential to do that, and I totally think you could get away with doing a steampunk theme army, like everybody in that kind of aesthetic. So, anyways, go ahead.
Very easily. Off the top of my head, those are some of the ones I can think of. I mean, we can also go into video games, which we don't really need to. As you mentioned, cosplay was really big, and it's out everywhere. Again, it's very, very popular just because you can put almost anything together and come up with a pretty decent outfit and have a history that goes along with it or a story.
Right, and I think that's a great little signpost into where to go next. I think probably the most alluring thing, one of the most alluring things to me about steampunk is first its newness, and secondly is the only limit is your imagination. I mean, that, like, there are so many different ways you can go. There's no golden rules or anything along those lines. Like, maybe that it's got the goggles, that's pretty much it. I mean,
Well, I'd like to add a little bit something to golden rules, even though we don't really follow those or need to follow those for steampunk. Because steampunk is about mechanical, industrial, kind of grungy kind of look. There's, you always see screws and cog wheels, watch parts, clock parts, mechanical parts. And these are things that take places of arms, legs, heads, eyes, stuff like that. So it's kind of, even though they're not golden rules, that's part of the aesthetic. And when you see it, you kind of know what that is. You're not saying it's a Borg, but you know what? Star Trek, if you had a Borg, I guess that would be kind of sort of steampunkish looking because they just threw some mechanical stuff onto a human body. So, hey, all you Star Trek people out there, I guess you can tell me where I'm wrong there.
I mean, and what I meant by golden rule is that I don't feel like with steampunk that you're limited by things like, other games like Warhammer 40K, and even in War Machine, you have this issue too, that this is what this faction looks like, this is what a Space Marine looks like, this is what a Tyranid looks like, this is what a Warjack looks like. You don't have any of those type of things. With steampunk, you're really kind of free to go. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's definitely got a mechanical feel to it. But then the other side of it is that, you could paint a Victorian model and throw some gears on the base and say it's steampunk, even without doing any of that to the model itself, because it still fits the kind of the time period and the other part of the aesthetic, which is, that Victorian look per se. And it doesn't have to be Victorian per se, because there's also World War I and World War II steampunk. There's Western steampunk, which actually I like the Victorian stuff, but I actually kind of like the Western aesthetic to steampunk even better. But that's personal preference, anything for you. So, Dan, you had done some research on color palettes. Why don't we talk a little bit about that?
As you mentioned earlier, there's two different realms when we see cosplays and we see some professionally painted figures. You have the sepia monotone type of colors that go towards like the browns, the creams, dark greens, those natural colors that blend well with mechanical parts like brass and bronze and sometimes some silvers. And you also have the bright colored ones, the more the traditional that we think of Victorian era, where you have bright blues and deep purples, and those are also an aesthetic. I think when we talk about steampunk in a gaming world, I would imagine most of the time we're going to be going into the more traditional brown sepias, creams, earth tone colors, and that seems to be where we end up, even if we don't want to, because you have a lot of leather on. You can paint your leather different colors, but sometimes we're going to just go with traditional one because it is during that late 1800s, which is Western, like you mentioned earlier, which is raw leather and that sort. So you have that. We already talked about some of the rules and some of the aspects of it.
I was just going to say, it seems like the color palette's really a lot of times, and if you look at something like Scale 75 Steampunk paint set, colors are very desaturated. They're not necessarily vibrant per se, but they kind of have that feel of worn, not bright.
Yeah, and that's a pretty awesome book.
Oh, it's a paint set. I don't know if it's a book.
Oh, damn it. There's a book, Steampunk in Miniature book from Scale 75. And I see lots of earth tones and browns and bronze and green, but they're all Scale 75 colors.
Right, of course. Well, of course, and that's like you said, though, what's interesting is, so you're not going to see, you still see some steel, but you're going to see more copper, bronze, brass, and thrown in iron as well. And those are you're more muted metals. You're not going to see as much gold and silver per se. It still exists. It's still out there. but it's definitely something that, that's definitely, those follow more along those earth tone feels. One of the things that we talked about with Jack the Ripper was that the setting kind of created itself to lovely kind of diorama feels to it. So what do you think about with steampunk? Does steampunk lend itself to that type of diorama as well?
It does. Usually the atmosphere of steampunk is going to be like an industrial area. That's usually the setting that we have. So again, we go back to browns, bronzes, dark muted golds, blacks, oxidations, greens, stuff like that to kind of make that setting. And usually the focal point of that setting is going to be the person that's in that environment. Like you would imagine a vintage photograph or something being that used to live a long time ago, but like in the future, a long time ago. So that's kind of like how I would think of having that atmosphere and building the atmosphere around your figure.
It'd be totally cool to see if somebody would do a steampunk diorama in that all in sepia, like it was an old Western photograph. Like, you go to those places on the beach and you can take an old-timey photograph with your family. It would be badass if somebody did a diorama. I'm
pretty sure someone has to have done something.
I've seen an army done that way for another game, for a Western game, and I thought it was hot. Right. I mean, it was, and they went through and explained like how many different sepia, because if you say sepia, Games Workshop sepia is different than Scale 75's sepia colors, which are kind of the two that come to mind. They don't have a sepia ink per se, but they have intense wood and intense chestnut. Those two are very close to different types of sepia. Reaper sepia, very, very brown, as opposed to like GW's, which is oranges. And, so that you go, and Vallejo's is very much, it's closer to the GW, and that it's kind of got that orangish yellow tint to it as well. So the sepia is a broad range of paints and colors.
Exactly. And if you look up sepia miniatures, well, you'll come up with a bunch of colors that sepia color. Doesn't make any sense.
So wait, if I look for sepia miniatures, I'm going to...
If you look for sepia, it's going to come up. Sepia is going to come up, I promise. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure,
I didn't want to confuse you there.
It's 2020. You just never know what's going to happen,
Well, that looks kind of purple to me. Dan, what's wrong with your sepia?
Exactly. I was reading this forum thing the other day that somebody was arguing about whether this pink color was magenta or pastel pink, and I'm like, who cares? Just use it. Either use it or buy a different brand. You know what I mean?
Oh, I had a very long conversation with the artist Mrs. about that, and I was telling her how I read an article about magenta, and she was just like, yeah. She's like, it depends on how your rods and cones in your eyes pick it up. It can be a red or it can be a blue, because all it is pretty much red and blue. But so it's kind of interesting, and it made me think a lot about if we were painting with a magenta, does it end up being like that? What is the dress? What color is the dress? Is it blue or white or something?
Blue or gold, I thought. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But it's just your interpretation of it. And I think that's why sometimes when I'm painting with certain colors, or if I do a certain mix, it doesn't look right to me because I'm looking or expecting a red or blue, and I get something different because my eyes aren't picking up to it because they're so close together. Kind of like eating like two different kinds of cheese, and you're like, well, I can't really tell what this one is. It tastes like that one.
As long as you can taste it, that means you probably don't have COVID. That's a good thing,
Yeah. Hey, did you hear that people are like having parties where like when they forget how everything tastes, and then when their taste comes back, then they have big parties and try out all these foods and stuff,
and then give everybody else COVID? No, I'm just...
that I guess so. Yeah, it's like, hey, I don't have COVID anymore, and I can taste all these foods. Like, oh my gosh, I forgot how awesome it was to experience popcorn the first time, right. Or to experience, creme brulee.
I love creme brulee, and I hate it when people mess with creme brulee and like, I'm gonna make like a berry creme brulee. No, leave it alone. Just make it creme brulee. Don't add anything to it. Leave it alone. So one of the things that I think is, I kind of already mentioned this though, but this to me is what I can't emphasize this enough about one of the reasons I like the aesthetic, and I put a miniature I found on Demented's website on my Christmas list because I just love the freedom that the newness of the genre gives. And I feel like sometimes I do get stuck in trying to paint things certain ways that there's an expectation of what it's supposed to look like. And I know deep down inside, I bought the miniature. If I want to paint a pink with purple polka dot Space Marines, that's what I'm going to do because it's mine. But sometimes you do get stuck in kind of constructs that are created by the community or even sometimes in the lore itself. I feel like with steampunk is that you have so much freedom to expand and go anywhere you want. There's so many so much unexplored potential with steampunk.
And, that kind of like dovetails into other things. When you talk about steampunk and you want to apply it to other types of genres and expand beyond certain things, it starts to turn into different punks. You're asking me before about diesel punk and what exactly is diesel punk. Well,
is that wait? Is that all based around Vin Diesel?
It is. He's got he's got one robot arm and he's got a flamethrower in the other arm and one of his eyes is missing and he wears a top hat with goggles.
Nice goggles. Damn the goggles.
He rides a mechanical bull that is steampunk. Nice. So there's different. They expand out. So we have our cyberpunk, because that was the first time that punk term was used, and then each different area uses different types of punk. I don't know how to even explain different punks. So when we talk about steampunk and it starts to mesh a little bit with different genres, it creates a different kind of punk. The first one, I believe the first one, at least the first one I was exposed to was cyberpunk. So that's that kind of mid-'80s kind of, people have mechanical stuff attached to them, the bright colors, and then you have the leather stuff, you have that. But you also have the diesel punk, which we were talking about, atom punk.
Well, one question though. So for cyberpunk, I feel like my first exposure to that was Blade Runner, the movie.
Yes.
So that kind of aesthetic. So okay.
Yes. So we would have the two different aesthetics of dark and dreary with some bright highlights, and then you have kind of the pinks and purples and stuff that we normally see. That to me, that aesthetic is cyberpunkish to me. That's just my interpretation because that was kind of my first introduction to it. There's some crap called splatterpunk, which is just blood and guts. But hey, they just want to put punk on the end of everything. So diesel punk is would be what would be called the Mad Max, because you're talking about guns and post-apocalyptics and rust, and it usually has to do with pollutions and oil is involved. They give that diesel feel to things, and we'll probably talk about some of that stuff later on. Kind of my newish cool one is, they call it ray punk, but I've heard it called atom punk also, and it deals with that kind of 1950s kind of sci-fi vibe where you have rockets and spaceships and sometimes there's some goofy looking alien that's a biped with a mask on, funky looking ray guns, so Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, that's the old stuff. That's another type of punk that you would find out there, and then it just starts to expand, and people's imaginations can create all kinds of things. Shoe punk and biopunk and
Watchmen fall under ray punk, maybe then?
No, what would let's see. Let me think. Would Watchmen isn't steampunk? Would be kind of close. No, you know what? I'm not going to give it a punk name. There is a term for it, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
Well, I know it is revisionist history. I know it falls in that. You also throw...
Well, it's an alternate history.
Right.
And that's what kind of...
Or revisionist history. I meant alternate history, yes. My bad.
Yeah, because Nixon he's still alive and he's still president.
Well, no, not in the TV show. Robert Redford is president.
Oh, okay. I don't see the TV show.
Oh, okay. Can we actually?
I'm talking about the real one. I'm talking about the comic books, not the silly movie or TV show.
Actually, the TV show was fantastic. By the way, it was actually really good.
And I haven't seen the Lovecraft one either, so shoot me down for that one. And finally, for all you audiophiles out there, there's Daft Punk.
Is that a genre for miniatures?
I'm sure, they have helmets, so maybe 40K Tau would probably fit in there somewhere.
For the greater good.
Yeah, it's for the greater good.
So we've covered different types of different genres, different types of punk, different things. Is there anything else with steampunk that we should add? We've also talked about color palettes, kind of a neat way to do a diorama could be industrial feel, or like somebody fixing a steam-powered robot, etc. There's a bazillion places that you can go. Is there anything else that we need to touch on for steampunk?
When we were first talking about this show, we were trying to decide on something kind of small, because if we were to go with a science fiction, it would be pretty big. And steampunk is a lot bigger than I was thinking it was, because it's so free with what you can do, and the limitations is there are no limitations. And I think this is a heck of a lot bigger. And it's a giant world. I'm not even going to try to point you to different websites. You probably have seen them and have experienced them. There's really cool stuff out there. Find your niche. Just a quick search, just joking around about steampunk and cosplay. You can go into gothic stuff, and it just takes you all kinds of rabbit holes you can go into with this. Find what you like and have fun with it. Use your imagination. Throw a couple cogwheels on it, some watch parts, and you got yourself some steampunk.
We kind of say that tongue in cheek, but it's kind of a cool thing about it that you just kind of sparked something in my head. The kind of the goth steampunk look, because the goth does have some Victorian kind of background at some level. Especially in the world of gothic horror, there is a combination right there that is just fascinating to explore in the world of miniatures. I mean, gothic horror with the steampunk vibe. Yeah, I'm in. I make that movie. I'll be there eating popcorn. Absolutely. Or give me a gothic horror steampunk miniatures any day of the week. That sounds right up my alley. And you're right, man. The freedom that steampunk offers is something it's refreshing. It's fun. You can go murky earth tones, but you could also go bright, vibrant colors of the Victorian era. Because that's one of the misnomers, is that Victorian England was all dark, because all the stuff that we look at besides black and white photography is that you see a lot of pictures of men in kind of darker colors, drab colors. But the Victorian dresses at the time and the female clothing at the time was much more vibrant and brighter. So there's so much potential. You can go any combination of the two, that's what's wonderful, is that you can go with kind of muted colors and some bright colors, and boom, you got that magic C word, which is
cog.
No, but that's a good guess. Contrast. It is steampunk, so that was a good guess. But you can get contrast in many, many different ways. So, and even in steampunk itself, when you have the soft skin of a human being next to the mechanical arm. There's contrast in and of itself. The rough texture of burlap and the materials that they were versus maybe the smooth texture of something that's metallic, etc. So there's so many different avenues to pursue for things that are contrast in steampunk that creates kind of that visual interestingness that we all love to talk about, and makes your miniature stand out. I won't say that it makes your miniatures pop, because that's kind of getting on my nerves these days. I don't know why, but it makes your miniature stand out. Lets the volumes speak for themselves. Haha, look at that. Turning all this art knowledge into cliches.
One thing that, as we're talking about this, steampunk seems like it would be a good palate cleanser. A lot of folks, when we look on the forums and read hey, I've hit this block. I'm in a rut right now. I'm sick and tired of painting my 5,000 points of Space Marines. how do I get out of this? You know what? This would be a great palette cleanser because you can do anything with it, but you're still confined to try to work within that aesthetic. You're going to work on blending, trying to get those colors to work and trying to build up that contrast. Yeah, you're working with some, kind of monotone-ish kind of colors, but it's giving you a different outlet. You're still continuing to paint. You're still being creative, and it gets you out of looking at bright blues or bright reds all the time. Now you're looking at something a little bit more muted, and that might be a good refresh. So that might be something, especially maybe when I get burnt out of painting my 30K Dark Angels, I'll just throw some steampunk in there and just see what happens. Not black platinum leather steampunk, the more browns and sepia ones.
Hey, and I think that's actually a great idea. And so you constantly see on forums and Facebook groups and stuff, like, hey, how do you get out of a slump? I'm at a block. Switching over to a different genre, like going from fantasy to steampunk or sci-fi to steampunk, that is a great idea for kind of cleansing your palette, kind of putting some separation in between the kind of humdrum nature of army painting per se. The one thing I will say is I know for me, sometimes I have to be careful when I do something like that because sometimes I feel too free and I get stuck and I don't know where to begin. And so, like what you had said at the beginning of this, a great way to do that, to kind of overcome that, is start out with reference material and lore and look at pictures. Do internet searches on or Google searches on steampunk, etc. Whatever you're working on, it doesn't have to be steampunk, but those are great ways to find inspiration, to give yourself a plan, to kind of guide yourself. Like if I go into a genre that I've never painted before, I have to make a plan. Even if it still feels free or something like that, I get kind of mental block when I don't know where to begin. And so that's kind of my one little warning about that, but I agree with you that it is a great idea to have it as a palette cleanser.
Yeah, I might give it a try.
You should, man. You should take a break from the grim dark world of 30K or 40K and get into the grimy dark world of steampunk.
Yeah, I was just thinking, is that if we do a show on like grimdark, I mean, we could almost say the same thing about, it's like, hey, just look up dark steampunk and there you go. There's grimdark.
Right, exactly.
But that'd be another show. We'll just talk another show about all that because that would be another fun topic or genre for us to look into.
Agreed. Agreed.
Cool. Now that we are done talking about that, because I'm all steamed the punk out, let's talk about some other stuff. Let's see what's going on out there in our world.
So what is on my plate? Well, honestly, I haven't made much progress painting-wise. I'm in that stage where I'm working on a miniature for a gift. For one of my nieces for Christmas. And I've got that kind of Zenithal primed, and I started doing a light sketch on it, and I found out today what her favorite colors are, so I'm going to try to incorporate. Now I have a little bit more of a plan. I've been stuck on that a little bit. But I've really one of my main focuses, I'm working on a Sequitur Prime, which was practicing non-metallic gold and freehand. And the freehand I'm doing is also non-metallic gold, which is kind of double dumb on my part. Hey, you don't know how to do something, so do it twice in the same miniature. But actually, it's coming along pretty well. I ran into some hiccups. I did not like the NMM steel that I was doing, so I decided to change the knife blade. Armor is gold, and it was the only thing that was steel on the miniature, so it kind of stood out and took attention away. And so I actually went for kind of a purple aesthetic on the blade instead. So like I did the whole, like, I don't want to say purple non-metallic metal, but it's purple painted with a non-metallic feel to it. The kind of the lights and shadows on it, kind of high contrast to give it kind of a bladier feel to it. But actually, I was surprised at how much that actually kind of unified the model, that the steel was really standing out like a sore thumb when I was painting it, and I was painting it very poorly, so that didn't help as well. And I probably could have done the steel and added some glazes, etc., some purple glazes to it to give it some of that feel, but I am just not there skill level wise yet. If I was doing regular metallics, I probably would have just used purples to shade, and give it that feel instead of like going like a blue steel, etc., along those lines. But, besides that, I prepped a few models. That I got a dwarf from Reaper Bones Black. That's it's called an enlarged smiter. So I've never painted a dwarf before, and this is kind of a bunch of simple shapes on this dwarf. So that'll be a palette cleanser for me when I'm done with my Sequitur Prime, and before I start really getting into painting the piece for my niece. Hey, that rhymed. Other than that, nothing really new has come in. I got a whole bunch of miniatures from that Kickstarter from Nocturna Paints, and I've only played with one of those paints a little bit. I'm going to play with a little bit more when I do the Puppet Master for my niece. So that's kind of all I got going on, man. I haven't been to any new stores. I haven't done anything really new since the last time. What about you? Any Kickstarters or what's on your desk?
Oh, I've been like knee deep in hobby crap the last 2 weeks. Let's see. Forge World sent me the Lionel Johnson, and I've been working on him. And damn, is that model so much fun to paint. Maybe it's the size. Maybe I need to get out of those little 28mm stuff and go a little higher. He is a blast to paint. I'm having a lot of fun with this guy. So much so, I'm just going to take my time and maybe over the next couple of years finish him off because I'm enjoying it so much.
Let's settle down now, Dan. The next couple of years, let's be realistic.
Hey, I got that. I got that Thunderhawk sitting in my basement that's 15 years old. One of these days, I got to paint that stupid piece of crap someday. So that's really what I've been focused on in the last week. I've been trying really hard to take pictures, but I've really been just stuck painting this guy. And I've done it for the last week and a half or so, a couple hours a night, enjoying it a lot, having fun. Let's see. So what was it? 2 weeks ago, we met up at our Game Garrison, a shop that's kind of out where we live, and they had the Chimera paints. Chimera colors, and so I tested the black and white, and you tested what color? Orange, yeah. So I played with that for about 5 minutes and decided it was I don't even know how to describe it, but they were by far the best paints I've ever painted with. So about 2 days later, I went out and bought the rest of the set.
Oh, you did actually? You pulled the trigger, huh?
Oh yeah, dude, it is amazing. I try very hard not to say it's the tools that make good artists, but sometimes it sure helps a lot. And I've also found that these paints like my Raphaels a little bit more than some of my other paintbrushes. So I've noticed that they have a kind of liking for them, and they work very, very well. So it's kind of weird because I haven't used my Raphael in a really long time.
You know what other paint does as well? The Scale 75 artist tubes. Those work really well with Raphaels as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe it's because their thickness. Mm-hmm. They are, man, that stuff is like a paste. Almost a paste. But I've really been enjoying it. The reds are super bright. I haven't played with the blues, but the white and the blacks mix up very well. And it's just such a creamy, smooth finish. I enjoy them. I'm having a lot of fun with them, and I can't wait to play with some of the other colors. I used the ochre. I don't know what exactly the name of the color is. It's like the yellowish ochre color. I used that for Johnson's hair, and it just came out nice.
I'm sorry, I'm 13 years old apparently.
My Johnson's got yeller hair. So let's see. So I check my emails every day because I'm an idiot, and every once in a while something will pop up on Kickstarter. So I got a notice last week that my first wave of BattleTech stuff is ready to go, and they confirmed my email for the 18th time. So I should be starting to get some BattleTech mechs in and everything else that I have paid for 2 years ago. And then yesterday or so, I got a notification that my Ghost dry brushes are ready to ship. So in the next week or so, I should be getting lots of boxes of really cool Kickstarter stuff. I've been waiting a long time for these things. COVID kind of F things up for a lot of people, and Kickstarter was one of them. So it's taking a little bit longer to get here, and that's cool, and that's all right. So what I was talking about before about, you check your emails and everything, and I have 50 different email accounts for all these things. That something popped up for the Thing miniature game, and that is probably one of my top 2 movies of all time. So I didn't even read it or look at it. I just went and said support, and then I read over everything. I was like, this is pretty cool. I think it has another week or so left on it. I probably should look inside and see what else it's got. But every day I'm getting at least 2 emails for updates, because there's so many people that are purchasing this thing. So it's gonna be a pretty big game. So you get all the main characters, you get special bags, all kinds of stuff. I probably should pop that up and look at it. But I'm pretty stoked about this one. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's a miniature game? It's a minis game?
It is a miniature game. I think there's cards. I think it's card based. I'm sure there's some dice in there too. I don't care. I can throw all that stuff in the trash. I just want the figures because it's the whole crew, and they're going to have like alternate poses and things like that. I won't actually throw away the game. I'll probably try to play it. But they're going to have multiple scenarios. And then I think the last one I looked at said that they were going to have a second board game that's going to be, I guess, a kicker or something for the prequel movie that came out. So they're going to make all those characters and then make that base, and you can use those scenarios also. So I'm pretty stoked about that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to paint those guys up. I already have the Big Trouble in Little China one. Didn't play it, don't care, but I got a whole bunch of cool characters and figures because that's what I'm about. So that's, me throwing away more money before Christmas during a pandemic. So.
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the thing now. The thing.
The thing. Yeah, I know. Let me.
It's pretty sweet, man. It looks like a ton of stretch goals already. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's like literally it's every freaking day there's new. They're like, hey, guess what? Here's more stuff.
Nice. That's pretty cool.
So, yep. Threw my money at it, and I'm looking forward to painting more crap. I don't need.
Well, you reminded me too. I did get something new, and it's something that I ordered months ago, not through a Kickstarter, but I was very intrigued. You like BattleTech. I love the Robotech stuff, like the Macross era Robotech, and the Kids Logic makes a line of resin Robotech models. They looked fantastic. I ordered mine back in July. I just got it the other day. So it's been a few months. 3 months now at this point. Over 3 months it took to get it. And I ordered it from Hong Kong. No offense, Kids Logic. Big Bad Toy Store has them, and they have more than you have on your store. So if you're going to go for... if you're going to order Robotech miniatures, which I highly recommend. They're beautiful. They're a little bit smaller than I'd like. I'd like them a little bit bigger. But it's actually incredibly detailed. I got Skull Leader 1, which was one of my favorite characters from Robotech. And I will probably, if I actually manage to get some paint on that, I will probably get a few more down the road.
Yeah, when they first came out, I was huffing and puffing because I was really deep into the BattleTech stuff at that point. But I decided not to because that's just another rabbit hole that I didn't want to fall into. And their sculpts are incredible, and they are true. Was it 1/285 scale.
Right.
So that's why they're a smidge smaller than the rest. But damn, those sculpts are top notch. And yeah, you'll pay for them, but there's so many good things that they've been doing with
I
that,
would say the price isn't, you and I disagree about this. I don't think the price is too bad on them. That Skull Leader 1 cost me $11.
Yeah,
shipping
but,
was stupid of me because I got it from Hong Kong, but I could have gotten shipping at half the price from Big Bad Toy Store. That was just a dumb, I didn't know about that until after, because I saw it on a
but in
raw
1985 money, it's expensive.
Well, no, and honestly, it might be for what it is and its size. Somebody might look at that and say 11, because they average between $11 and $13. And
well, unless you want the freaking destroyer thing, which is like, what is it, like $50?
Right,
but he's huge. He's gigantic.
Yeah, it's really a large badass model. Somebody might look at that and say it's expensive, that they don't want to, that, they're looking for models that are more along the lines of the Reaper Bones costs or the WizKids cost. Totally fine. That's how they want to spend their hobby money. You know what I mean? And that's all good. For me, I didn't feel like the $11 I spent on it was that bad. The shipping on it was stupid. I should have done it through Big Bad Toy Store. They're getting a lot of promo in this episode. If you're listening, hey. But it's just one of those things, and that's, and for you, the value to the dollar isn't worth it to you. So that's all good. You know what I mean? Plus.
No, it's all good. I mean, really, I had them in a cart. I had about 4 or 5 of them in a cart ready to go. And I looked over and all my BattleTech guys were all sweeping. So I was like, all right, let me paint you guys first before I start going to the next ones. So, and I still have to paint all the ones that are freaking 3D printed, and that's what. Anybody want a 3D printer out there? Not that I don't like it, I just don't have time for it, and it takes up all the room where all my record players are supposed to be stored and fixed.
I just want you to print something for me.
You haven't sent me anything yet.
I have sent you stuff.
What? I printed that thing for you. It was a little small.
That one little guy you printed for me, but was that other thing that I got? Or you said you had the fish, the woman on the fish. You already had that.
Oh, you want the woman on the fish?
I do.
Okay, let me see if I can get this stupid ass thing to work again. Before it gets cold out. When it gets cold out, then it won't print anymore when it's cold outside. It has shrinkage problems.
I was in the pool. Anyways, all right. So, any other announcements or anything that you had that you want to let our listeners, plural, know about?
That's right, listeners. No. Should I?
No, that's all good.
Okay.
So I guess with that we can kind of wrap up the episode then, I guess.
Sure.
All right. Well, we're curious if our listeners enjoy this type of show where we talk about genres and how they influence miniatures and miniatures influence genres, etc., and the painting and all that lovely stuff. Let us know on Facebook or Instagram at Listening to Paint Dry, or on Twitter at Dry Painting. You can also email us at listeningtopaintdry@gmail.com.
Subscribe, like, and follow us wherever you get your podcast. A share or a good review would be very helpful for the show. We're looking for 3 listeners. You can help us out.
So like Steampunk, freedom of imagination is critical to becoming a better, braver, happier painter. Until next time.
See ya.
Listening to Paint Dry with Mike and Dan is a production of LTPTWMD. All rights reserved. No portion of this recording may be used without the express written consent of the host. The music is Death by a Thousand Questions by Springtide. Download from the Free Music Archive on a non-commercial attribution share-alike basis. All views and opinions expressed in the show are solely the views and opinions of the person who said them. All celebrity voices, if any, were impersonated and done so poorly.